Hey everybody, welcome this month to our Don't Get Rusty episode. Today we're talking about Bravo. Charlie's flying in the big time. We're going to talk about Bravo and Charlie airspace, kind of a follow-up to our last episode last month where we talked about towered airspace in general. We're going to deep dive into Bravo and Charlie today. So before we get right into the content, let's, as always, just talk about some of the things that everybody needs to know just so you can ask questions because we'd love to hear from you. If you are using a computer, you're going to see a menu that looks kind of like this. You'll see a little like the cartoon text bubble or whatever with a question mark in it. Make sure you click on that, type in your question here, and then make sure you hit the send button so that we can hear it. If you're using a tablet, it's a very similar process, but look for the little question mark here. Type in your question, as you can see here, and then click that send button so that we get it, because otherwise we won't see it, and we want to make sure. Now, of course, lots of you guys we're going to ask lots of questions. We will do the best we can. We love your questions and we love the audience, but again, sometimes we get overwhelmed, and that's okay. So we're going to try to hit them up and do the best we can. Of course, as always, my name is Chris Moser, Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA. I work with CFIs and flight schools, and I'm glad to be here. And I'm, of course, joined by Dan Justman. Tell us about yourself, Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here as well. Get to work with Chris and Steven, hiding behind the scenes here today. I've been with Flight Training Initiative, get to support these guys and also the Rusty Pilots program, the You Can Fly program. And as of this week, I also get to work with AOPA's Flying Clubs initiative. So we have got a great set of resources available from the AOPA Foundation You Can Fly group, AOPA.org. Check it out. Great stuff. Great resources for everyone.
Awesome. And as always, behind the scenes, hidden until we get 1 million subs, Steven. Say hello, Steven.
The Mass Crusader. Hello, Steven.
Too much.
Coordinator Flight Training Initiative. I get to work behind the scenes on a bunch of different projects. So I get to help out with our survey each year. I get to help be a producer on this show and try to help keep Chris lined up on things he has to take care of from day to day. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And as you see it there on the slide, Steven just ran. He ran a half marathon and he's prepping for the Philly Marathon in November. So if you're up in that Philly area,
Crazy.
Go out and cheer him on. We'll keep you updated as we go forward through the year. All right. So want to thank our sponsors, Jeppesen, 4Flight, and Boeing for sponsoring the program. So we always appreciate that. And go check out their products. 4Flight's a great one. I enjoy using that one myself. All right, reminders. Yes, these are the most common questions we get, so we'll try to refer to them throughout the episode today. But yes, there is wings credit for this webinar only if you are viewing it live. In order to get wings credit, you don't need to do anything as long as you give us the email that you use on the FAAsafety.gov website. If you've given us that email when you registered for the webinar, you are good to go. If for some reason you know that you did not use that email, just email Steven at ftinitiative@aopa.org. FT Initiative. Steven, is that the best way or does the chat work too?
FT Initiative is the best way. I'll lose track of them in the chat.
So hit us up at FT Initiative. That's Foxtrot Tango Initiative, the whole word initiative at AOPA.org. Maybe Steven can put that in the questions of the chat there so people can grab that email. And then also, we are recording the program, as always. It will get posted on YouTube on the AOPA pilot video, and you just need to go under there, look under playlists, and look for the Don't Get Rusty webinars, that series. You'll be good to go, and you can also see it there on the AOPA.org webinars page. So those will be, and that'll take a couple of days, so probably by Monday it'll be up or so, somewhere around there. Just give us a moment because we've got to get it processed and uploaded here at AOPA. Did we mention, Steven, you found another good one here for us this month. We've got Jacqueline Cochran. Yeah, go ahead and tell us about it.
Oh, in May 18th of 1953, Jacqueline Cochran became the first woman to fly faster than the speed of sound while flying a Canadian-built North American F-86 Sabre. So she had quite an illustrious career. She's flew in the war. Before that, she was a part of the 99s, and you can see there her hanging out with Chuck Yeager in the lower corner there.
Good company.
And a cool airplane. Look at that thing.
Yeah.
So, of course, I know what those look like. There's nice airplanes. All right, let's move on. Now, let's open up, as we always do, with our poll. And so the question's going with our theme today of Bravo and Charlie. What do you worry about most when flying in Bravo or Charlie airspace? What are you worried about most? Is it A, busting the airspace inadvertently? B, making a mistake on radio comms? What's the biggest worry you have out of these? C, feeling overwhelmed? Or D, I'm worried about being mistaken as an airline captain? What do you think, Dan? What would you pick here?
You know, for me early on in flying into controlled airspace, it was always just making sure I was where I was supposed to be, right place, right time, that I didn't inadvertently cross into a shelf that I shouldn't have, just to know where I was all the time. And then, you know, as time went on, I started flying, you know, pre iPads in the cockpit, and then once we got ForeFlight Garmin Pilot and those programs in the iPad, it changed that landscape dramatically and helped with situational awareness. But me, like a lot of pilots, I think listening today, had learned to fly and done a lot of flying in controlled airspace prior to having those tools in the cockpit. So for me, 100%, just wanted to be in the right place at the right time and not bust the airspace inadvertently.
And in fact, I'm looking right here. We got about 73% of folks that have participated. We'll give you just a little bit longer. We'll see if we can get that to 80% before we reveal the poll. But it looks like the audience looks like they're leaning in that direction as well. Man, I can remember being a student pilot. I learned out of an airport right near the BWI. Back then, I think it was Baltimore approach. But I can remember just being terrified on the radios, though, of going in, and also being warned like crazy from my instructor, do not bust this airspace, and just I got really good at avoiding it. So
yeah, similar for me. I did my primary flight training in the Orlando area at Orlando Exec, which was right next to Class Bravo for MCO. And same thing. It was, I mean, the airspace was like on the south side of the runway, like it was that close. So that was put into our brains and our toolkits pretty quickly, is to take that seriously and not make any silly mistakes, turning to the right or left, depending on the traffic pattern.
There it is. All right, let's go ahead and reveal the poll, Stephen. What are our results? I think everybody should be seeing it. And as we can see, just about half the audience, 49%, saying busting the airspace, just like you were saying, Dan. Not a surprise, totally get that. And then making a mistake on the radio comms, totally can see that too. And then sometimes along with that, maybe it goes to that feeling overwhelmed. And as always, whoever that is, our 3%, I love this person because they always pick my silly answer, being mistaken for an airline captain. And Stephen, he's been working on his airline captain impersonation. You want to do it real quick for us, Stephen?
All
right. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Hopefully that was all as clear as mud. So, all right, what are we doing for the Bravo and Charlie today? Today we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a quick review of speed limits just because I thought I would be remiss because you do need to be aware of those. Although most of us flying in general aviation aircraft, not really an issue, but maybe you're flying something that can go a little quicker, and it doesn't really take that much to get up to those limits. We're going to talk about the general flow. I tried to do it. I started out by doing it in a flow with both Charlie and then the Bravo, and then I found that some of them are similar. There's a couple that are. So we're going to go through arrival, entry into the airspace, sort of some ideas and practices for operating within the airspace. Then we're going to talk about the flying over, under, and through. Specifically, when we get to the Bravo, that's where I really break it down. And I know that, so we've had a couple of questions ahead of time, and that's generally what they were about. Folks generally aren't thinking about necessarily flying through it as much in the sense of like entering it, but just how to navigate around it. So we'll talk a lot about that. How to deal with satellite airports. We had some questions ahead of time about that as well. And then finally, the departure one was the one that really, they're very similar when it comes to Bravo and Charlie. So I'm just going to combine those two into one, just one discussion. So let's get into this. Okay, first off, let's review your speed limits. And by the way, there is a handout. Well, I'm going to show a piece of paper. These are my notes, but the handout is based on those notes. So there's a handout, and what I did was for all of the major topics where there were regulatory or references in the AIM, the Aeronautical Information or the Airman's Information Manual, check it out. I put the references there, and I also have a ton of links for everybody too. So I've got some great courses that I'll mention from AOPA. So there's the one about radio comms, there's one about airspace flashcards. There are some articles in there too, some briefings, so some really good stuff. So I will reference those. Those are all there for you on the handout section and with links to get you to the right place, except for the regs. I just assumed you could look those regs up yourself. I just gave you the reference, not the link. So check those out. So 91-117 speed limits. Just remember, we do have speed limits. When we're below 10,000 feet, we've got a 250 knot speed limit. Again, you know, other than when I'm flying the fuel injected 180 horsepower 172, then you have to throttle back a little bit, you know, keep it down below, say 110. So I don't want to blast people out. Or when you're at or below, and I will try to mention these as we go, but when you've got a 200 knot speed limit, when you're at or below 2,500 feet within 4 nautical miles of a Charlie or a Delta. So in other words, think of a 2,500 foot, you're down, getting close to like, what, about twice pattern altitude, and then you're within 4 nautical miles of that primary airport in Charlie or Delta, you've got a 200 knot speed limit. And then if you are, and here's the other part, if you're under Class Bravo or going through a VFR corridor. So if you're using flyways that we'll talk about later, or going through a corridor, you've got a 200 knot speed limit. So just keep that in mind for those that might be flying something a little quicker, like maybe a Mooney or a Bonanza or something like that. Maybe if you can get that fast. It is possible. I know when I was flying freight, I got up into flying a twin, and some of the twins will go that fast. So if you've got something you're flying quicker, remember your speed limits. Don't forget about it. Okay.
Hey, Chris,
now,
quick clarification question on that is the 2,500, 10,000, is that MSL or AGL?
AGL.
Thank you.
So that's 2,500 AGL for those. And then I believe, shoot, I have to go look it up. Well, luckily I know the reference, 91,117. Let's go double check that. I think on that 10,000 feet that is MSL, but I want to double check. Here we go, aircraft speed. Let's see here, 10,000 feet MSL, yep. And then the other one's at 2,500 feet, just to verify, is above the surface. So that is AGL. So confirmed on my FAR AIM app.
Cool.
Okay.
One more with that, indicated or ground speed?
It is indicated because it says indicated airspeed of more than 200 knots.
Thank you.
And the other one indicated as well. Because ground speed, heck, I mean, we potentially with a nice tailwind, we might be able to get that fast in a 172. If it was a hellacious one, but it's possible, right? So, okay. Let's get into talking about now really getting into the meat, because that sort of was a very quick review of the speed limits, just to keep those in mind. Let's talk about the Class C, Class Charlie airspace, and what I thought was, based on the questions we were getting ahead of time, people were really asking a lot about, like I said, not necessarily going into the airspace, but flying around it or under it or over it. So if you're arriving at a Class Charlie, you're heading towards Class Charlie, we had really a couple of questions asking this one about, when do I need to talk to them about this outer area? Now remember, you'll note on the chart here, these magenta boxes. So it says contact Buffalo approach within 20 nautical miles on 12615. We're over here within 20 nautical miles on 126.5. So that's 1.5 over here and 0.5 there. And then of course the military frequency. So those boxes are letting you know, like, hey, they would like you, and notice the phrasing I'm using, they would like you to contact them when you're within 20 nautical miles. But I really want to clarify here, you are not required to talk to them if you don't want to. So for example, you're on a cross country and you're cruising sort of, maybe from the southeast to the northwest right here, and you're not going to enter into where the actual Charlie is. You don't need to talk to them if you don't want to. So there's no requirement. So, and the reason I mentioned this is because someone had asked me, what happens if I just want to go and do some sightseeing and I'm getting close in that 20 nautical mile area? You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to. However, that said, what I want to say is that it's probably a good idea, because basically what's going to happen is if you contact approach, they're going to give you flight following. And it's like, in what they really are doing, the reason they want you to contact 20 nautical miles out is because they want you, number one, if you're coming into, say, Buffalo in this case, they want to sequence you into all the other traffic. So they want to have a plan. They want to know well ahead of time before you enter the airspace, so they can sequence you in, because they're busier, right? They're going to have regional traffic there, some airline traffic, corporate jets. It's just going to be a busier airport. So it's a good idea to contact them, but you are not required to. The follow-up question along that was, well, what if I'm going to be in that outer area and I want to talk to them, but I'm not going into the airport? What do I tell them? So what I do is, you might start off with listen to the frequency, and then figure out how busy are they. You can get an idea of how busy they are. And then depending on how busy the frequency is, I'll start either with, and I'll talk about this again later, I might say with, hey, Buffalo approach Cessna 65659 or VFR request if they're really busy. That way they can get back to me when they've got a moment. But if, 20 nautical miles, the question I see from Thomas there, it's from the Buffalo airport. So 20 miles out, because this ring on the chart, this is a 5 nautical mile ring typically, and this is a 10 nautical mile ring. These are what they normally are, not that they couldn't ever be different. So they're saying 20 miles out from the airport, they would like you to contact them. You do
Chris,
need to talk to them before entering these areas within the airspace itself.
Similar to that question, when you're talking about speeds, is it like when you're within 4 statute miles, that's the airspace or the airport?
Say that again, please.
Is for statute miles, the question was a primary C or B is that to the airport or perimeter of the airspace?
The airport, because the reg actually reads from the airport, from the primary airport. Yep. All right. So what you could do then in that case, it's like I'll start with either that VFR request and then they come back and say, okay, what's your request, 65659? Or if they're not super busy, then I'll just go ahead and ask them what I want. And so it might be, maybe what I want to do is I want to fly over Clarence here. Maybe I've got a family member that lives in Clarence and their house is there. So I'd say to them, Buffalo approach Cessna 65659er, we'd like to do some sightseeing over Clarence, or give them whatever it is, the landmark you want to do, and just wanted to get flight following while I'm doing that. That way they'll be able to help you with traffic, and they'll know what you're doing and they can plan around you. Because you're VFR still at that point, right? You're not under clearances from ATC or anything like that. You're staying out of their airspace, and you can do what you want, or even like Alden or any of these things that are out here. The other thing that you could do too is if you're not sure that they'll know where that is, somebody asked me that too, then give them, say like, we're going to go over this town and maybe plan this out ahead of time if you're planning on this, that is about 12 miles in the case of this one down here. I don't see what the East Aurora, it's 12, actually they would know what this one is, but 12 miles southeast of the airport. And that way they have an idea of where you're going to be and tell them what altitudes and stuff. Remember, you are VFR. As long as you stay out of the airspace, you can do what you want. You're just being courteous and getting help with avoiding traffic. Hope that makes sense. Okay, the other question we have was, which frequencies do you use? And as you can see on the chart, the easiest way on the chart is just look at these. Now, the question is, what if I'm coming in down here, and I'm halfway in between? Which one do I use? Eyeball it, and if you're not sure, just pick one, because if you're on the wrong one and they get radar contact on you, all they're going to do is say, okay, contact this frequency instead. They're going to switch you over. Now, you can be more accurate with this. If you go to the chart supplement, which you can get through an electronic flight bag or the old little green book, we used to call it the AFD. And in fact, I know in ForeFlight, if you go into the airport information, it still says AFD, even though it's called the chart supplement now. But if you go under the communications section for that airspace, this is Buffalo's airspace, you'll see approach departure control, and then it gives you radials off of the airport. So if you are between the 053, which would be kind of northeasterly, to the 233, which is kind of a little bit, southwesterly, you're going to use 12615. And if you're from the 234 around to the 052, you're going to use 126.5. So that'd be from that south. In fact, if I go back and show you real quick, so the 234 was that dividing point. So it's about here. Then around here, you would use 1265 and up to about, and then if I forget what the other is, like 053, which is around up here, then all of this, you would use 12615. So if in doubt, you can use that, but you can also just try a frequency and they will correct you if it's not the right one. Hey, Dan, let's do a real quick, let's take that script that I provided, if you would. Let's look at the Charlie one and just the arriving. So if you would be the pilot, we're gonna read you an example. And by the way, this script that we're using is from the Air Safety Institute, and we've got it in the handout for you. So there's a direct link to it. So would you be the pilot, please, real quick?
Absolutely. Greensboro ground. Wait a minute, were we doing arriving? Sorry.
Arriving, yeah, the approach one.
Sorry, I jumped to Greensboro approach. Cherokee 8121 kilo, 20 miles west, 5,500, landing with Foxtrot.
And then ATC would come on and say, Cherokee 8121 kilo, Greensboro approach, squawk 2150 and ident. So notice they give you a squawk code.
Squawk 2150, Cherokee 8121 kilo.
And then ATC is going to come back and say something like, Cherokee 21 kilo, radar contact, fly heading 110, descend maintain 4,500, maintain VFR.
Fly heading 110, descend and maintain 4,500, maintain VFR, Cherokee 21 kilo.
Thanks, Dan. And notice there that they did give a heading and an altitude, but notice what we requested. We requested landing at the airport. So that handout is, somebody's looking for the handout, I know, so let's help him out, if you would, Stephen, in the questions there. So it should be over in the little side menu. There's a handout section, should be a PDF. And if for some reason you can't get it, just let us know. We'll be glad to post it with the YouTube channel or email it to you. Okay, so those are the frequencies. When we talked about what to say, the biggest thing I would say, let me go back one here, is make sure you're accurate with your position as always, just like we talked about last month with Delta airports or towered airports in general. Be accurate, so know where you are. And then if you're just in the area, I already kind of talked about that. What do you do? I mentioned the part, just talk to them and just try to be as accurate as possible. Just say, I'm gonna be out here to the southeast, about 15 miles or whatever it's gonna be, and we'll be doing some sightseeing. out of the airspace. So they'll probably come back and say something like, okay, squawk this, and please remain clear of the Charlie airspace or something like that. So that's basically it. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Any questions that I should hit here before I go to the next slide?
Nope, we're okay.
Cool. All right, for entry into Charlie, what are the things that you're going to want to hear? Well, for permission, you don't, unlike Bravo, you don't need permission, like explicit permission, to get into Charlie. All you need to do is establish two-way radio communication. What does that mean? Of course, hopefully we all remember, you're going to want to hear your call sign. So if they use your call sign, November 1, 2, 3, in fact, let's say you call up, you make the request, and they come back and say, November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, stand by, or November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to fly heading 120 and 3005, whatever they might do. The fact that they've used your N number, you are good to go. The only exception to that would be if they say November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, remain clear of the Charlie airspace. They're letting you know we're too busy, we've got you, we're talking to you, but we've given you explicit instruction, do not enter the Charlie airspace. So then you would want to circle outside until they allow you to come in. But other than them doing that, you're cleared to go and fly through the airspace, whether it's transitioning or heading towards landing or whatever. Just follow their directions. If they respond with something like aircraft calling, stand by, that is not two-way communication because they have not acknowledged you with your call sign. So if they do not use your call sign, you are not allowed to enter the airspace. You have not established communication yet. So just keep that in mind. All right, any questions on those before I go to the next bit?
Nope,
cool, good. All right, equipment. Obviously, to do all this, you're going to need a two-way radio, so pretty straightforward. You also are going to need a transponder with mode C when it comes to flying in Charlie, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those details in a second. And as we know, ADS-B out. You need at least ADS-B out, which is the equipment that sends out our information about our airplane. It even has our N number on it. It's got all kinds of information we're sending out to other aircraft so that other aircraft can see us along with ATC. And that's the 1090 ES or the 978 UAT. I am not an ADS-B expert when it comes to all the little fine details, but I did provide a link on the handout that has AOPA's website that talks all about it. So check it out if you want to know more about ADS-B. But ADS-B is cool, by the way, because the one thing I will mention about it is if you have ADS-B in, and I know our airplanes have that, I even have a little Stratus or one of those Sentries or the little devices that will feed to your iPad. Those are great too because I get weather on it, traffic. It's really cool. So ADS-B is a neat feature to have. Okay.
Hey, Chris, we've got a couple questions coming in about transitions into Class Charlie, and what about flight following?
Yep, we'll talk about that in a second because that's coming up.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then if there's specific ones, they hit me up with those when we get there. That's coming up really soon. A brief moment on ADS-B. This is an overview. This is from an AOPA graphic that I found. And so the big part here is just remember that basically, not exactly, but where ADS or where transponders were required, ADS-B is required. ADS-B has some additional things beyond transponder in just a couple of instances. But like a transponder, it's required if you are in Class Charlie or above it. Notice that, I'll talk about that again. Or if you're in Class Bravo or within the 30 nautical mile veil. Notice that Charlie, you don't have to have it as long as you're outside the Charlie, even if you're under the shelf, as long as you're not in the airspace. But Bravo, you are required to have it when you're in that 30-mile veil. And again, I'll review this again later when we get to it. If you're above 10,000 feet, you got to have ADS-B and a transponder. And then it even gets into stuff with Class Alpha, which we won't worry about, but it's the type of, obviously this 1090 ES is required when you're getting up into Class Alpha. Unlike a transponder, it's required to 12 nautical miles from the coastline. I don't think the transponder is required out there. I don't remember that being specific with transponder, but I have to go back and review that to double check. But I remember the ADS-B being different there. So check it out. Great article, and in the handouts, you can check that out. Okay. Yes, and somebody said there, Gerald, you said, don't see the script to the thing, only links. The link goes to that script. So the script is not in the handout, but the link to it is, and I think it says sample radio calls or something like that from AOPA. All right, so we were being asked about, it was something along the lines of the transitioning the airspace. Is that right, Dan?
Yes.
Okay. So let me hit this and then we'll see if we can get those specific questions. I do have this one, and the one after it is the over and under. So this is kind of like going through it. When you're going to go inside the airspace with Charlie or Bravo, we'll talk about specifically Charlie here, but it is the same basically for Bravo. You're going to get vectors and altitudes. The big thing you want to do here is make sure that you read back the instructions in full. So if they say something like, fly heading 120, maintain 3,500 feet, make sure I jot that down and read that back to them to make sure that you're clear on what it was. And if you're not clear, ask and clarify. We talked about this last month, I know, if they're really busy or they're going too fast, don't be afraid to ask them to slow down. Okay, so read back those instructions, read them back in full, copy them down as needed. And here's a trick that I use. I used to do this with paper. I've been using my electronic flight bag, for-flight Garmin Pilot type of thing. They usually have scratch pads in them. And I keep a little column thing where I keep heading, altitude, and frequency in columns. And so that way, when they give me a heading, I just jot down 120. If they give me an altitude, I'll write down 3,500, 3.5 or whatever. And then I also use this when I'm transitioning frequency. So if I'm getting handed off, like using flight following to the next center, next approach control, whatever, I jot those down. And the nice thing is that I can see what the last one was. So if I go to the next one and I can't find it, I already have a record of what that last one was. So highly recommend. So if you can imagine, I just have columns coming off of these and I just leave a space there so I can jot them down as I'm giving clearances and different headings and things like that. So you're going to get those if you're in Charlie and Bravo. They're going to be controlling your path around. The cool part is it's not like they're just going to, like in Delta, where they're going to say enter on 45 for whatever. They're going to vector you around and usually drop you off on final or something. When I've flown into Bravos and Charlies, I don't ever remember being told to fly a pattern. It was usually I was vectored around onto final, and then they would tell me cleared to land on the whatever runway they put me on. Because like I said, I flew a lot into Tucson out in Arizona and Phoenix, and that's usually what happened. Same with going up to Las Vegas. So they're going to give you that, and they're going to vector you right to final most of the time. And then your comms flow, this is something I mentioned last month, but I just thought I would throw it in here again for a good review, is that as you're approaching and getting ready and going into landing at one of these airports, the first thing you're going to do is get your ATIS information. Then you'll get your approach. You'll talk to approach at that point. Maybe you're already on with approach. Just let them know, I need to get the ATIS, and they'll let you go off frequency if you don't have a second radio. And then they'll hand you over to tower, who will then guide you in, obviously, to clear you to land. And then finally, when you're on the ground and clear the runway, you'll contact ground, unless told otherwise. So see somebody asking, when heading is called out, is that really aircraft heading or ground track? When they give you an instruction, it is heading. They will account for wind, because what will happen is they'll give you a heading, and if you're not following the track that they want, they'll just tell you turn 10 more degrees or whatever. They've already taken that into account. So don't worry about that. Yeah, because it's like that would be way too confusing for us to be trying to figure out ground tracks while we're flying like that. They're just going to tell you to fly a heading. Okay. Any other questions to follow up on that for the transitioning?
Yeah, transitioning, that was it, was about, will center coordinate that transition? And then also, you're on flight following, do you need to switch to approach when you're on flight following for those transitions?
Okay. For the transition, you're just going to ask, and they'll generally give you direction. I'm going to go way into detail for Bravo. For Charlie, it's a little more laid back. If you're asking the transition, they will likely give you, like for Bravo, they're really going to try to keep you out of the way. For Charlie, my experience has been that generally it's a little more laid back. They may give you some vectors and try to keep you out of the way of the departing or approaching aircraft. So they may give you vectors for that, but they're just going to give you an altitude to hold, and it's not going to be as big of a deal. Bravo is way more specific, and so we'll talk about that in detail when we get there. I think the other question was, the handoffs. If you're on with flight following, they are going to hand you off to the appropriate frequency. So they're going to hand you off to approach. And if you're just transitioning, you're not going to talk to tower. You're going to talk to approach the whole time. Or they may hand you off to departure, which is basically just another name for the reverse of the approach. Sometimes they're different frequencies depending on how busy it is. But just do what they tell you. They'll tell you what frequencies. Be listening for when am I going to get that next frequency change. But they will hand you off. When it comes to the transitioning, generally, that's the advantage, and I think I've got that on a later slide. The advantage of flight following is they know where you're going, and my experience has been, like with Charlie, you're already talking to them, so you don't need clearance into it. You're already talking to the people, so you're just going to be able to fly through because you're talking to them. For Bravo, you still need to hear cleared into Bravo, but if they know what you're doing, 9 times out of 10, it seems like they know what you're doing, and then when you switch on to that appropriate approach frequency, they're going to say, Roger, 65659, or cleared into the Bravo airspace, proceed on course, or maintain this altitude, or whatever. So that's usually what happens, but you've got to be paying attention just in case they don't, because if they don't, you remember you're still VFR, do not enter that airspace until you know that you're cleared into it. So if in doubt, circle and ask, verify. Okay.
Along those lines, Chris, what about if you inadvertently go into the airspace without clearance, what's your best course of action there?
Get out of the airspace, file a NASA form, right? So when you get back on the ground, yeah, just really try to avoid it. If it's inadvertent, just be careful and file that NASA form. It's up to you. Like if you just dip in and out, just get in and out. I don't know. It's up to you if you want to call and just like confess. I'll tell you a true story. This is what happened here. This was not me busting airspace, but this is kind of how I handled it because we was right after 9/11. I was out in Arizona. I was in that point training to be a CFI, and I remember we had a friend of mine. We were both working on our CFI. We had taken off out of Deer Valley. Had opened the airspace back up after 9/11. And we were taken out, and we were near Luke Air Force Base. And so Luke, these two F-16s came up, and we were like, hey, cool, F-16s. And then all of a sudden, we see the F-16s like really close to us, and one waggles his wings, and we're like, oh, did we just get intercepted? And they waggled their wings. We looked at them, and we were like, okay, we're not doing anything wrong. Like, what's going on? And then they just took off. So we weren't sure what happened, if they were just messing with us or just taking a look at us. So we called Luke Approach right away, and we were kind of like, I didn't want to say like we just got intercepted. So we just called Luke Approach and just said, hey, Luke Approach, this is where we are. This is our number. And they're like, okay, squawk this. And that was it. So we were like, okay, I guess we're all right, because we figured we would have gotten reamed out. But we weren't talking to anybody. So it's up to you if you want to call them, and talk to them. Like I said, I talked to the attorneys about that, but I'm not sure what to tell you, what the best course of action. But file the NASA form, especially if it's inadvertent. That's what they're for. All right, questions? And if you fly into it and you realize like you're way into it, just get on frequency and confess. That's probably the best thing to do. Is just say, hey, I'm in here, my mistake, I need help because I screwed up.
There's a good amount of questions about flight following. No surprise there. You said the trigger word, and the questions are blowing up. Do you want to dive into any of those, or just keep pushing through and get to those at the end?
Yeah, save those for the end. If you think they're appropriate to what I'm talking about, we're glad to talk about them, but maybe we can hit those up at the end.
Yeah,
right,
I think
let's talk.
One specific was about on like underflight, which you're getting to right now. So I think that's perfect.
Okay, so because remember, I'm going to talk about all this flying through, in, around, all that stuff. All right, so over in underflight, when it comes to Charlie, I've already kind of mentioned this, but remember that if you are not going into the Charlie airspace, you don't have to talk to anybody if you don't want to. It's great. I would recommend get flight following, talk to them, because they'll help you avoid traffic. And they're there if you need them, right? They're there to help, but you don't have to. So remember, you're still VFR. The only requirement really is, so like, for example, let's say I'm flying and I'm down low here. Here's the airspace. We can see the inner core of the Charlie airspace is at 4,700. And then you've got, it's down to the surface. So this is that inner right here. Like you can see this inner cylinder. And then out here's the shelf. It goes from 2,200 MSL on all of these up to 4,700. And so if I'm out here and say I'm flying at 1,500 feet and I want to go just poke around and look at stuff, I don't have to talk to anybody, or I can talk to flight following. I am still VFR. I'm not in their airspace. You are totally allowed to do that. And it's the same. I want to really just emphasize that outer area we talked about. That is purely advisory. They want you to talk to them, especially if you're going in to sequence you, but you do not have to. So you're not required to. It's just nice to do so because they'll provide you services. So if you're underneath of it, you really have to, in fact, there's a warning in the AIM and then one of the references that I gave on the handout that even says, if you're flying down low under that Charlie shelf, you're likely to run into aircraft that do not have ADS-B or a transponder or a radio, because they are allowed to operate under there. So even if you're talking to them, keep your eyes open. You still have to do visual see and avoid, because they're not necessarily talking, and you might even be below the radar coverage that the airport has. So just be aware, and just to that point, you don't have to be talking to them underneath of it. So if you just wanted to skirt through, obviously not flying over into Canada here, but if you wanted to skirt through here, you can do that. You're on a Cub and it doesn't have anything like that, you can do that with this part. The thing that you do want to remember is, I already mentioned it before, but I just wanted to reiterate here, if you are flying over it, while you are totally allowed to, you don't need to talk to anybody. You do need to have a transponder and ADS-B flying over the Charlie airspace. But the thing that I want to warn you about, please remember, is what is coming out of the top of that airspace. It's jets. It's jets that are climbing on their way up to alpha airspace, right? So that being said, I would highly recommend, even though you don't have to, talk to them if you're flying over it. Let them know what you're doing, because they will help you avoid and help the other airplanes avoid you. Right. So yeah, same thing. We'll get to that, Kevin. I see that comment there about Bravo. We're going to get there. Okay. Any questions on that? Specific?
Good.
Okay, let's go to the satellite airports, the last bit here. So when it comes to satellite airports, when do you have to talk to ATC? Well, I was going and I was purposely looking for satellite airports that were inside Charlie, and I only found a few, and they were restricted private airports. It was very rare. The vast majority, and literally was on, I think it was on maybe ForeFlight or SkyVector I was using, and just scrolling my way across the country looking at Charlies, right, over the entire thing. And every time I would zoom into a Charlie, it usually had this kind of stuff. And I just picked this one because it stood out good against the light green. And you'll notice that these little airports that are out here, they've been carved out of the Charlie airspace just so they don't have to talk to them. So the folks at these non-towered fields do not need to talk to them at all. So if you're flying into one of these airports, again, you can talk to Approach, good idea. Approach will hand you and tell you to switch frequency, or if they don't, you can ask, hey, I want to switch to advisory frequency now for that airport, and just let them know that, and they'll be like, okay, cool, Squawk VFR, frequency change approved is what's going to happen. And that way they'll help you avoid traffic, but you're allowed to go in here and not talk to anybody. But let's pretend that it was inside the Charlie, right? If you have an airport that's actually inside the surface area of the Charlie, then what you're going to do is you're going to have to talk to them to get into that airspace, but then tell them where you're going. Like, say, for example, let's pretend that Buffalo Airfield was inside the Charlie airspace here. I would let Approach know, Buffalo Approach 65659er. I'm inbound for landing at Buffalo Airfield. All right, so then they're gonna say 65659er Roger, proceed on course, so they might give you some direction. When you get close, you could even request change to advisory frequency or to CTAF, however you want to phrase it. They will turn you over. You will fly the pattern just like you would any non-towered field, go in and land. And if you were departing, you would depart just like you would at a non-towered field. You'd make your calls there, and then the AIM and the regs typically say, barring something in the chart supplement or something else, it's typically just going to say contact the tower or contact Approach as soon as practicable after takeoff. So in other words, get up and out of the pattern and then call them. Be ready to call them, plan ahead to call them, but just get up and fly the airplane like normal. You need to still avoid traffic at that non-towered field before you call them. But just obviously be ready to flip right over.
Chris, some questions on ADSB. I think that was a popular topic. We breezed through it pretty quickly. First of all, the link, that information is on the handout.
Yes.
So please do view that. Quick question about this example at Buffalo. Is ADSB required above the outer ring? Example, above 4,700 feet.
Yes, it is. And let me go back here so you can see this diagram came from that ADSB diagram, and notice ADSB is required above Charlie and above Bravo, transponder too, by the way, all the way up to 10,000 feet. So if you're flying over this 10 nautical mile ring, I'm not going to say outer area, just the 10 nautical mile ring, that cone of ADSB and transponder goes all the way up. Because again, remember, there are jets popping out of there and they're trying to help avoid traffic. So that's why they require it for safety. Cool.
Okay, good.
All right, let's keep going. All right, so I combined these two into one because they are basically the same when you go to Bravo and Charlie. They're really not any different. I talked about this last time, so I'm not going to spend as much time on it. But when you are getting ready, you're on the ground and you're getting ready to depart out of a Bravo or a Charlie, it works the same way in these types of airspaces. Like I said, I flew out of Tucson and Phoenix a whole lot. Same procedure. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to get your ATIS. Then you'll call and get clearance delivery. Sometimes clearance delivery and ground will be the same frequency, and you'll request your VFR departure clearance because they're going to give you instructions on how to get out. And last time you might recall that I went over this craft thing where it's like they're going to give you something along the lines of, on departure, fly heading 360, maintain VFR at or below 1,600 feet, squawk or a contact approach on 119er 0.65, or it might be contact departure 119er 0.65, squawk 0123. So you're going to get a clearance like that, and you're going to need that before you taxi. In some cases, you might call, like at a Tersa or maybe some like quieter Charlies, you might call ground and ask for taxi, and then they're going to give you this as part of that. So be prepared to get a clearance like this, because even at a Tersa, like we have one up in Harrisburg, I flew out of there and they gave me a VFR departure clearance as well, because they're going to just hand you off and help you sequence out. So a Tersa, by the way, of course, is a Delta with radar area around it, and so it acts basically like a Charlie. And then you'll go to tower for takeoff and then departure as you're departing out of the airspace. So I hope that's clear. I went over this last time, so I wasn't planning on talking as much detail, especially looking at our time. I'm trying to keep us moving here. All right, Takeoff and departure, again, we reviewed this last time, but I just thought it was appropriate. Oftentimes you'll be told to maintain runway heading. So when do I turn on course? Well, then they will tell you, turn on course or fly this heading when you go over to departure. So fly runway heading, tower's gonna flip you over to departure, you'll contact them, and then you'll give you instructions from that point. Otherwise, we don't really have any guidance other than what ATC gives you. The AIM just says, otherwise, when departing, maintain center line 1/2 mile beyond departure end and within 300 feet of pattern before turning. But when we're in Charlie or Bravo, you can expect direction. And they will have given this to you on departure, fly heading 360, right? So maybe the runway is like 330, and they told you to fly 360. When do I turn? If in doubt, ask. But basically, just get to the maintain a center line 1/2 mile beyond the departure, and then turn. Ask them otherwise if you're not sure.
Chris,
So
what about when you exit the airspace? Do you need to like ask permission to switch frequencies as you exit? That question came up a couple times.
You don't have to necessarily. Like it depends. Remember, they're gonna if you exit that airspace and they haven't told you frequency change approved, squawk VFR, they're going to keep you on with flight following, right? Because you already told them as part of this generally where you're going. Like I'm flying out to the north or I'm en route to whatever. So they're going to give you flight following, barring them being busy and just sort of kicking you out. So I would say as a courtesy, you want to try to get to them and say, just want to cancel flight following or whatever. I guess I'm wondering if people are talking about it's super busy and you can't get through on with them. It's like unless you're going to an airport really nearby, I'm not sure how to like answer that with like absolute authority. Like say for example, I was leaving the Bravo and I wanted to get in here to Frederick and I exit the Bravo. They're usually going to hand you off. So we'll see if anybody in the audience has got other answers on that one. But yeah, I don't know what to tell you. It's like because it's like what's probably going to happen to you? You're outside their airspace. You can't do it while in the airspace. Right. You're outside the airspace. They're giving you flight following, and you switch frequencies for some reason. I would always try to tell them that. What's likely going to happen is they're going to try to call you. They're not going to get you, and then they're just going to like cancel your flight following because it's you're not on the clearance at that point. So again, my recommendation would be try to contact them and ask them to switch. Okay, let's keep going. Let's get into Class Bravo now. So the Class Bravo airspace, and again, I'm assuming that folks here are mostly certificated pilots, so we're already kind of familiar with the basics of the airspace. Of course, the blue solid lines and everything else. If you want a review, check out the handout. There's a course that AOPA has, the Air Safety Institute has called Know Before You Go. It goes in depth into airspace, so definitely check it out. And I see somebody, they will provide you the frequency to follow. Yep. So I've got folks in there, so we'll keep monitoring those for me, Dan. All right. So when you're arriving at this, the big part you want to remember is you've got this mode C veil, which I'm sure we all remember. And notice now, I'm going to click, it says mode C and ADS-B out. So that 30 nautical mile veil is both ADS-B and for transponder now. So you got to have both before you enter. And notice that now, unlike Charlie, where you can fly under it and not have to have any of this stuff, when you're going to fly under Bravo or in at 30 nautical miles, you must have this equipment. All right. You don't have to talk to them if you're staying out of their airspace, but you must have this equipment. Then you've got, of course, this is just a quick review of the altitude and boundaries. Of course, these solid lines here are the Bravo shelves. And within each of those sectors, you're going to have a number like this, where it's going to just show you the bottom and tops of the shelf. So it goes up to 12. This is Denver. So it goes up to 12,000 feet, which is unusual for a Bravo because most go up to about 10. And it goes down to 7,000. And when you get closer in, it'll have arrows pointing and things like that sometimes. But generally, they're going to put it within the appropriate sector. So notice this one's pointing here. This one is 12,000 out of 6,000 feet on that shelf. And then we had the question of, like Charlie, where it's relatively easy, there's normally like 2 frequencies that you'll use. Bravo can have a ton of frequencies. So, yeah, handoff, then cancel flight. Exactly. So I agree with you, Peter. Someone says, unless you need to use the radio, stay on the frequency until they give you a handoff, then cancel flight. Exactly. So I said, stay on with them. They're giving you flight following, and that's what I would do. All right. So which approach frequency do you use? Well, check it out right here. You can see, I didn't put little red marks. Where's my mouse? There it is. I wanted to be able to point. So right here, it shows you again. Now this one, Denver's a little different. It just gave us, like if you're approaching, approach control, if you're coming from the north, 119.3 or 124.95. Unfortunately, that doesn't help me a whole lot with which one do I use. So you know what I would do is I would take the first one. I would try it. And if I'm in the wrong spot, they'll just tell me contact this one. So that's what happens here with Potomac. Sometimes they'll just flip you over and say, you need to contact me on this frequency. If you're coming from the south, there it is right here, 120.35 or 12655. I'm going to show you a different one because they aren't always like this. I just happened to pick Denver because it stood out well on the chart. And here's departure. If you're departing, it says east, northwest, and they give you the frequencies for those. Now, this is what you're normally going to see on most Bravos. In that same section, and this is out of the airport, the AFD, the old AFD, the chart supplement, you're going to see this again. Notice the vectors, the radials off of the airport. So from 020 to 130, so kind of northeast-ish down to east, 119.0. If you're from 131 to 180, so that's sort of southeast quadrant, 119.7, and so on. So they lay all of that out for you so you'll know ahead of time. You can figure out, this is where I'll be entering from, this is which frequency to use. If you don't know, like say you're on a flight following and you didn't exactly know which direction or which sector you're in, don't worry. If you're on with flight following, they'll tell you what frequency to contact. They'll handle it for you. So that's the cool thing. Flight following actually makes things a lot easier.
Chris, do you ever hear the frequencies through ATIS? Do they instruct with ATIS sometimes?
I don't recall that going into Bravos, because again, I'm normally as a GA pilot, when I was flying freight, flying into the Bravo, flying into Sky Harbor all the time, no, in fact, I ended up memorizing them because I did it every day, but they would just hand you off. And then on the ATIS, I can't say that I don't always listen to the ATIS at BWI, for instance, because I'm not going to BWI. I'm usually flying somewhere else. So obviously listen to the ATIS, check it out. I know I did run across the ATIS. This is just one. A couple of the airports I came across when I was looking at these had ATIS for departure, ATIS for arrival. So maybe in those cases, you might see some specific frequencies like that. So I can't speak with absolute authority on that, but you just want to listen and see what's going on. And of course, you can go find those on the internet too and listen to the ATIS.
Quick question from altitude when you're reporting, is it AGL or MSL when you're reporting your altitude?
When you're reporting your altitude?
Yep.
You're going to read what's on your altimeter, and I'm assuming you have that set with the barometric setting, so it's going to be MSL.
There you go. Thank you.
To get into Bravo, I'm just watching our time here, you need to hear, as we all know, you need to hear that cleared into class Bravo. If you do not hear that, or you're not sure, do not enter that airspace. If you have to, you turn and circle. In fact, somebody even said, what if I'm on a vector? And in fact, there's an article, I stuck it on the handout. I remember reading this as I was researching all this stuff. And it said, if you're on a vector and it's taking you into the Bravo, but they have not cleared you into the Bravo, are you going to get in trouble now because your vector is taking you in? So if you turn, you're breaking the vector, but if you go in, you're busting the airspace. And our attorney said that you need to turn because that traffic vector is not the same as a clearance. It's not a clearance. You're on a VFR vector. It's not the same as a clearance. So therefore, do not enter the Bravo. If you need to, you turn and circle, do whatever, but do not enter the airspace until you hear that cleared into Bravo. Yep, I'm going to talk about transitions here in a little bit, Ernie. All right, radio comms. What I already mentioned this before earlier, so it's like if they're really busy, I might just say 65659 or VFR request. So like Potomac approach, Cessna 65659 or VFR request, and then I'll let them get back to me. If they're not super busy, I will be a little bit slower on my delivery just because I know that they're going to go, oh, somebody's calling and I got to jot all this stuff down. So I try to like give them a second, but I'll give them the full query of what I want. And I'll talk about that in a second when we get the transitions. And then I've already mentioned flight following, the advantages of those. If you're using flight following and telling them where you're going to go, that is going to make a lot of this easier. Equipment for Bravo, two-way radio, transponder with mode C, ADS-B out. It's the same stuff as Charlie, no different there, other than they cleared into Bravo, really. Okay, when you're operating within the airspace, when it comes to getting a vector, being given an altitude and your comms, same thing as Charlie that I've already talked about. Yeah, it's like somebody said, you can query your approach if on a vector and not cleared. Yeah, you can definitely ask them if you know you're heading towards it. But what I'm saying is if you can't get through or something, the situation where somebody couldn't get through, then you do not enter that airspace without that clearance. But yes, definitely query them if you know you're heading towards it. When is it less busy? Now, one of the things that I know people are going to, or maybe may ask, I would wonder myself, is how do I get good at this? Like, because the really, I think the major thing with dealing with Bravo and Charlie is you being good on the radio. If you're good on the radio and you're solid on that, this makes us all a lot easier. The question is, how do you get good on the radio? And of course, people will mention, listen to live ATC, listen on frequency, listen to the different things. You could definitely do that to help. But honestly, I know that I got good at it, and the reason was because I flew in busy airspace. I was at Deer Valley Airport, which was really busy, and then I had to fly through. And I would remember, even Deer Valley was busy, it was at first terrifying for me to go through the Bravo at Phoenix, but I just had to do it on a regular basis, and it was just over time. It just got better at it. You get used to it. So the thing I would say is you just need to go do it. The more you do it, the better you'll get. If at first you're a little worried, go up with someone who's experienced and start to work with it, and then just have a CFI go with you and have them help you, because that is probably, I think, one of the best ways to learn. But you can prep ahead of time by looking at scripts, listening, all that good stuff. But doing it, I think, that's what's going to help you finally get over that hurdle of getting good at it. All right, now maybe you want to go into the Bravo when it's not so busy. So how can you find out when it's not so busy? We used to always at Sky Harbor, if it was we were out flying at night, sometimes on night cross countries and things like that. We knew by a certain time, like we knew they weren't as busy, and we would request, hey, is it okay if we do a touch and go off the big runway? And they would usually let us do that. So how do you know that? Well, there's a couple ways. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the chart supplement or anything that really says these are our less busy times, but there are some ways to get an idea of when that is. Number one, go to the website for the airport. Like I looked up BWI, and they have like all their arrivals and departures on there. So just look at that. You can very quickly tell they've got arrivals starting at 9 a.m., and then all the way through like midnight. So we know that they're probably pretty busy at those points. So if I went really early in the morning or really late at night, they're probably a lot less busy, and I'd be more likely to have it a little bit easier going in there. You can check out the chart supplement under the airport notes. And what I found was at some of the bigger airports, they'll have times when flight training is restricted, like you can't do it. So of course, the assumption we can then make is if flight training is restricted during this time, it's while they're busy. Go when it's not, and it's probably less busy. So you could use that as a little clue. One thing we found, we were actually chatting with an old friend, Pablo of ours, FAA airport arrival demand chart. This is something he used to like to use. So he says this is a great source, so go check it out. There's a link on the handout. You can go look up the airport and go check out the part there, and you can see all the arrivals and departures for any airport. I think it's all the big ones. So check that out. Listen on frequency, and then you also just eventually get local knowledge of when the push times are. All right. Questions before I move on to over, under, through?
When reaching out to Bravo, if you don't have a lot of experience, should you mention that to the controller? Let's say student pilot Bravo?
Well, remember in Bravo, unless you have an endorsement, you are not allowed to fly through Bravo because you have to have a private pilot certificate to go into Bravo. Charlie is different. You can go in as a student pilot. You could say Rusty pilot. This is where I would say if you're really like finding you're like, I'm not as proficient, get a CFI to go with you to help you, because what my experience has been is that a lot of times, if you're good on the radio, they'll let you do a lot of stuff, and you hear other people that aren't as good on the radio, and they will tend to vector them around it because they don't want to deal. They're busy, and they're not wanting to deal with somebody who's going to have a hard time in blocking up the frequency. So get somebody that will be willing to help you, and I think that would be the best way to go through to get through the Bravo. And like, trust me, like for me, it was a combination of being a student and my instructor making me do it when I was out in Arizona, and then eventually becoming an instructor and just having to do it with my students. That got me over the hurdle. So doing those two things. So that's what I would recommend, is get a CFI and just tell them, this is what I want to learn. I want to get good at this. And a good CFI, they will push you, prep you, and push you, and you'll get it. Don't worry, it'll come. The biggest thing is just learning to anticipate what's going to come next. And especially doing things like transitions, they're predictable. So then you can get good at it. All right, let's move on to the flying over. When it comes to flying over Bravo, same things apply that I mentioned. And like overflying, I'm going to do under in a minute, but flying over as the Charlie, you are required to have ADS-B and transponder flying over it. You do not have to talk to anybody if you're staying outside of their airspace. So in the Mode C Veil, you need the equipment, but you don't have to talk to anybody. But flying over it, remember, and this is coming from a former airline pilot that I knew, actually a current airline pilot for Southwest. He said, remember, these big jets are popping out of the top of that thing. So talk to them because it's going to help you avoid that traffic. So just make sure you got the equipment, recommend talking to them, even though you don't have to. But now let's get to the stuff that I know people were asking about. Over, under, and through. So VFR corridors, and then I'll get to the flyways in a second. There's only one corridor that I could find when I was looking around for examples, and that is this one that goes right here through San Diego. And you'll see there's these magenta arrows, and it gives you'll notice here that it's weird. Look at this airspace. I don't think I did zoom in on it. Perfect. look at this right here. It says that within this part of the Bravo goes from 2,800 MSL to 3,300, and then starts again at 4,700 and goes up to 10,000 feet. Whoops. So there is a slot within that is this corridor that you're allowed to fly through that you don't have to talk to ATC on. It's a VFR corridor. There are directions detailing what to do, and it gives you recommendations. There's a frequency that the pilots will use with each other. And Dan, I know you said you flew through this before yourself.
Yeah, I did.
That's scary, right? But
it was terrifying to start, but once you get through it, it was a great experience. So
yeah.
there's a lot of factors. One, the airspace is complex there, but two, my primary flight training was all in Florida. It was flat land, and there's these little things called mountains out there too that made the 3D flying and the airspace a bit of complex, and it was tough for me to figure out at the first part. But once we did it, it was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah. So with this, then you just follow the arrows. And here's the other part I want to mention. Notice these symbols with the black little points on them, right? These are GPS waypoints, and you'll notice it's visual point. That's what these VPs stand for. They've got all these, so these will help you. You plug these into your GPS, and I kind of zoomed in. You can see this better if you go look at the, this is on the back side of the tech chart, or if you've got an EFB, you just zoom in, it'll have that stuff. But you can plug these waypoints in to help guide you along the way. And a lot of the transition routes, there's a great article that I found on the LAX area, because I know people asked about that. Great article. It was too complicated. Literally, I had to do a whole webinar just on it. But there's a great article that walks you through each of them and how to do it. But you plug in these GPS waypoints. And in this case, you don't have to talk to anybody. You just stay at the appropriate altitudes to keep you within that corridor. And you can fly through that and just make sure you're seeing and avoiding other aircraft. So good to go on that one. So that's how that VFR corridor works. Again, a VFR corridor, you are literally flying through a hole in the Bravo. You don't have to talk to anybody. But you do need to have your ADS-B transponder, and you should be talking on that frequency with the other VFR pilots that are going through it. Now, let's talk about the transition thing. I used Phoenix last time. I went ahead and used it again this time just because I feel like it's easier to see. The same principles that I'm going to talk about here apply to what you're going to do in going through something like the LAX ones. The LAX ones are just more complex, but that article really goes into detail that I mentioned on the handout. So when you're doing a VFR transition, I saw somebody ask about how do you ask for it? So you would look for the name of it. And so in Phoenix, you'll notice right down here, actually they don't, this is east-west, see inset for requirements. It's got notes on that, but these were just called the north and west transition. So if I was up here, I would be outside the Bravo, right, circling, and I would call Phoenix Approach, Cessna 65659er, request VFR transition. Right? They would come back and say, squawk this, they'd find you, and then they would approve you. It's like, I want to tell them, I want to go, I'm up here, and I'm requesting the transition to the south. So they would then clear you into the Bravo, and they would tell you, fly the east, or so the transition. And actually, I guess they did call these the east-west transitions, because they would be basically telling us east or west of the airport. So they would tell you, cleared for the east transition, which meant you're going to fly on this side, this end of the runway. So I literally noticed here the VFR waypoint, VPPEK, and the other one is down here. There's South Mountain that's down there. There's another VFR, but we did all these visually. We just looked for South Mountain. And so we would fly down, we'd fly along, we would just see Phoenix Sky Harbor. They're big airports, you can see them, and we would fly along the edge, and they would tell you what altitude to fly. Once we got down here, I would just try to follow the arrows until I was out, and they would just transition us out. It really was not difficult. The scariest part was calling them in the first place. But once you're doing it, just knowing, like, just making sure I see Piestewa Peak, I see South Mountain down here, and this is where I know I need to go, looking for the golf course and so on, and you would just fly the route as it was. Really not a big deal. And the LAX ones, they look scary, but they literally have these waypoints, these GPS waypoints all along the way to help guide you. I think they've got stuff with the VORs you can use as well, but the GPS stuff makes it even easier now than it used to be. So I'm hoping that answers our questions. Let me hit the flyways.
We've got 1 minute left.
1 minute. We're almost done. So the VFR flyways. So for these, you're underneath the Bravo. You need mode C transponder, you need your ADS-B, but you don't have to talk to anybody. And I know somebody was asking, well, it says 5,500 or below, what altitude do I fly? Pick an appropriate altitude. If you're above 3,000 AGL, if you're flying, like, was it zero, this magnetic course, I believe, 0 down to 179er, then it's going to be an easterly. So it's going to be east is odd. So it's going to be like a 3.5, right? Or a 5.5 if you're allowed to do that. Or if you're on that western side, you're flying more of a westerly type of heading, then you're going to pick whatever the magnetic course appropriately is, an even one. So like a 2.5, 4.5, 2.5 of course is below that, but 4.5, etc. So you just pick an appropriate altitude. And if you want to get flight following, you can, because they will give it to you. Somebody you can ask because they don't want to do it, they'll just deny you. So you can always ask for it and get flight following. My experience with BWI, and Potomac approach is they will do it for you as you're flying through. By the way, please be warned, the DC area, you also have the DC CIFRA, that's a special course, which I mentioned last time. Okay, so the flyways, and somebody was asking, well then, it's like the airspace goes up to something higher, like here it's at 8,000 feet. Yeah, you can fly it at 7,999. I wouldn't recommend that, because how many is going to hold altitude to 1 foot? So they give us those things that are like usually a 500-foot buffer is to help you from busting the airspace, so don't do that. All right. Satellite airports, it's like somebody said, what about satellites? I got them. I did the satellites for you. Same procedure that we talked about. If it's under the Bravo, like these deltas that are jammed in here, and I think I zoomed in on one like this one. So here's Denver's airspace. Here's a delta jammed in it. Usually what will happen is if they're underneath the shelf, their delta airspace is just squished down. It's not as high. Normally 2,500 AGL, but it's squished down. You do like normal. If you stay outside the Bravo, you just contact the Delta Tower and follow directions with them like you would with any Delta. If you are cleared, like you're coming in through the Bravo, they will transition you. You're going to tell them where you're going. They'll hand you off. And they might even say, do you have ATIS at that, at that airport yet? And they'll even let you go off frequency to get the ATIS if you need to, if you don't have a second radio. So it's literally just like using flight following. You just have to hear that cleared into Bravo if you're going to be transitioning through the Bravo to get to the Delta, but they will help you with it. And just be prepared. Like, you need to be thinking ahead in these cases. What's my next frequency? What's the ATIS at my Delta? What's the tower frequency there? So that when they hand me over, I already know what to do. So plan this stuff out. But otherwise, operationally, it's no different. It really isn't. Okay. We'll skip that one for now. 101. Let's go ahead and officially end the webinar. I'm glad to stick around for questions till 1:30. But Stephen, really quick, want to tell us about the AOPA pilot passport, and then we'll get into our next episode.
The pilot passport is sorry, but the passport program is part of our AOPA app. You can see the steps on the side. They're going through the menu of the passport. It's a tracking kind of gamified way of checking in at different airports around the country as you travel. So it gives you data and information as you look them up, and you can do like a little check-in. It gives you some badges and points. Some of the stuff just kind of just neat. And our marketing folks who run this program do keep track of that and do some contests and things for prizes every once in a while based upon your points and check-in. So it's just kind of a neat way to digitally check in at different places as you travel about.
And key point to remember, Stephen, of course, is this is not Wings credit.
It is not Wings credit. It is just a little fun feature of the AOPA app.
Right. So if it's the AOPA app, not Wings credit, this code does not do anything for Wings credit. Just to remind you again, if you weren't here at the beginning, if you were looking for Wings credit, as long as you registered using the same email that you use with FAAsafety.gov, which is where you would go and look at all the Wing stuff, then we will automatically get you credit. Just give us a few days for it to get processed. So Stephen will take care of that. If you know, for instance, that you did not register with the appropriate email, hit up Stephen. I'll put it in the chat again, probably at FT Initiative, Foxtrot Tango Initiative at AOPA.org. So FT Initiative, AOPA.org. Just email us and let us know.
Yes. You do not need to contact me. You do not need to contact me for credit. Just if your email doesn't match the FAA one.
Yes, if you know you
submit.
Yeah, so yeah, please remember, if you already know you've put the appropriate email in, remember Stephen's got it covered, but the more you email, the less time he has to then go get it done. So he's got it covered, don't worry.
That takes me a little bit of time, but it'll probably be next week sometime, so it won't be instantaneous.
Yes, so please be patient, because we have to actually put it through somebody else before it goes to the FAA. And please also remember, if you're trying this code and it's kind of not working, we love our audience. You guys are amazing. What happens though is our audience is so big, which I am super proud of with Don't Get Rusty, so you guys rock. But a lot of times we end up crashing the app when you guys all try to go in there and do it at once. So jot the code down, YCF, so you can fly web as in webinar 051823. That will just jot it down, try it again in half an hour or so, and then you shouldn't have any issues. So, all right, let's just hit ahead to next time, and then we'll get questions. Coming up next time, this is a much demanded topic, and I finally was able to secure somebody, because even though I have my tailwheel endorsement, I am by no means a tailwheel sort of master of any sort. I barely felt like I could do it when I got the endorsement. So our next month's topic is conventional wisdom if you get the joke with tailwheel aircraft. Tailwheel world advice, horrible pun, but we thought it was funny. So tailwheel world advice. And so that's what we're talking about. And also, if you've got ideas, because we're often trying to figure out what do you guys want to hear? What do you want to learn about? If you wouldn't mind, email us, ftinitiative@aopa.org, or even in the chat right now in the question box, whatever. Let us know topics you'd like to see in the future. If you've got something that's been burning, tell us about it. But next month, we're going to have special guest Steve Bateman, experienced CFI, tons of tailwheel time and tons of tailwheel instruction is going to be on to give us tips and tricks and everything you might want to know about flying in tailwheel. Okay, that said, let's go back and hit the questions. And by the way, this is again, we've already officially ended the webinar. For those that want to have Wings credit, you're covered. Don't worry if you have to get back to work. We understand. We're lucky that we get to do this as part of our workday, which is super, super awesome. But I'm glad to stick around and answer questions. So thanks for those for being here. For those that want to stick around, hit me up. Let's go.
All right, here's one, not as much of a question, but a warning that I think is pretty good is, a warning might be in order to pilots that do not cancel IFR when flying approaches into airports near or under Class Bravo. You might find yourself in the Class Bravo without a VFR clearance.
So say that one more time because I saw somebody asking about they didn't see the code, so I put it back up.
I'm trying to keep up with it. The questions and comments are coming in so fast, my screen will not stop. I can't stay on it.
What was the general topic though? Was it?
When flying, a warning might be in order to pilots that do not cancel IFR when flying approaches into airports near or under Class Bravo. You might find yourself in the Class Bravo without a clearance.
Oh, right. The part of if you're on, I've heard that before too. And that's what I want to ask the attorneys, because I'm not sure about that, but it's the idea if you're on an IFR clearance and you're in Bravo airspace, which, because you remember on IFR, you don't need clearances. You're automatically cleared into everything. Then if you cancel your IFR, but you're in the Bravo and all of a sudden you're VFR, you're not. So again, I don't know if that's a real situation or not, because I've heard that before too. So I guess the recommendation there would be, it's like, hey, tell ATC, I'd like to cancel my IFR, but I also want to confirm that I'll be cleared into the Bravo. So just make sure you hear that cleared into the Bravo, because I'm already inside of it. So for those folks that might be worried about that, I would just ask and clarify. But that's a good warning. I've heard that one before.
Just one more time, we had the ADSB at 10,000 foot altitude requirement. Is that MSL or AGL?
That's MSL, 10,000 feet.
Thank you.
I'll verify that. There's the references are in the handout for where I got that stuff. So I will double check for you real quick. And actually, let me go back to hopefully everybody got that code, YCF Web 05. It's just today's date, 05/18/23. So May 18th, 2023. Let me go back to the ADSB diagrams. I think it says it right on there. There it is. 10,000 MSL. Yep, there you go. And I have every confidence that follows the appropriate reg.
All right, I'm guessing this question is from a departure from a non-towered airport underneath Class Bravo. Contact clearance prior to takeoff or after?
Okay, so if it's contacting clearance, the only time that you would need to contact clearance delivery would be if you're at a Bravo or Charlie airport. So if you're at a non-towered field, there is no clearance delivery. I remember reading let's say you're at a satellite airport that's within the Bravo or within the Charlie airspace, then what they say is, barring you knowing a local procedure, most airports are going to tell you, like what the AIM says too, is to take off and contact departure as soon as practicable. However, there may be situations where you can contact the departure or whatever from the ground, and so that's where you could always try that. But generally, what the recommendation or what the thing's saying, and so go do some research on this, right? Go read in the chart supplement, read what it says, and then you would ask the local pilots what the deal is. But for non-towered fields, the general operating procedure is take off and contact as soon as practicable, barring, check the AFD/chart supplement and see if it gives any other direction on departing that airspace, because they'll put notes in there for that sort of stuff.
On one of the charts, I'm not sure, I'm sorry which one's referenced here, but it says different frequencies for approach control depending on arrival direction, and then a frequency called final con, final CON. What was that?
I saw that too. That one that was in the one on right here. It was in the Denver one. So final controller. So That actually, you know what that might be, and I'm taking an educated guess here, so please don't hold me to this, and maybe somebody in the audience will know for sure. Maybe we've got some ATC folks out there too. My suspicion here would be is that when, remember I told you you get vectored around, you get vectored onto final, that is probably when you get onto that final corridor, it's probably the final, the frequency they're using for controlling that final, as in final approach, right? That corridor there, so they'll hand you over to that controller who's going to handle final until they turn you over to the tower. That's probably what that is. But again, please don't hold me on that because I've not flown into Denver. I have not experienced that before at the Bravos I flew into.
Can you find the appropriate Bravo frequency for approach on the sectional chart?
Unfortunately, no, you typically cannot find that. The ways that I have found it, again, you can find it here, and this is where you want to try to plan ahead, is find it here in the chart supplement for that airport, for the primary Bravo airport. The other thing that I use as a trick as well is that if I'm departing from, like here at Frederick, we're not far from the Bravo, in the information for Frederick, it has Potomac's frequency here, and so it's the frequency that you would call when you take off out of here. So if you're taking off from an airport that's not far from it, heading in that direction, use that, like look at that airport, look at that frequency. And again, my experience has always been, if I use that frequency, I call up and it's not the right one, they'll tell me the right one. They'll say, they'll give you a squawk code, oh, there's where you are, contact this frequency instead. Just don't enter the Bravo, obviously, until they give you clearance, which they won't do if they don't know where you are.
All right. I'm just filtering through these here.
Somebody just typed flight following.
Oh gosh, don't. That is a trigger word for us, for sure.
Oh, I see he's correcting the question before. So Daniel's asking, when you depart Class Bravo, there are two ways. VFR, only VFR with flight following. Class Bravo, treat VFR flight as the same as flight following. I think is what he's trying to say, the same as flight following. I agree. That basically when you depart VFR out of a Charlie or a Bravo, effectively you're getting flight following. The only two options, or not even options, the only two things that will happen to you is either they'll continue the flight following once you're outside of their airspace, or they'll just, dump you. They'll just kind of say, VFR traffic advisories, cancel, you're clear of the Bravo, squawk VFR. They're basically telling you we're done with you unless you want to keep flight following. But that's all up to them.
I think there's more to this question that's not written here, but when flying VFR with flight following near but outside Class Bravo, do you have to comply with ATC directions such as an altitude change? So maybe they're alluding to, like, is it a conflict with the altitude into Class Bravo if you're outside and you're on flight following? I'm not sure what they're there, but maybe that makes sense to you on that one.
So I'm going to harken back to one of our previous episodes where we were lucky enough to have Damian Gutperlet on from ATC. And so he told us that with ATC, in their book or whatever, that when we are outside of, like we're on flight following and we're under our own VFR control, it means outside of Bravo, outside of any airspace, right? We're in Echo, that we can fly whatever altitude we want to fly. Right, so we're allowed to fly what altitudes we want to fly, because the question, I know that it was Pablo had the question. He had the experience of flying all up to Chicago, and in some cases he would change altitudes and not tell them, and he got yelled at for that. And other times he said, "I'm changing my altitude," and then he would yelled at for telling them. And what Damian clarified was, he goes, "You do not have to tell them that. It's a courtesy." Right, and he said it sounded like the person that yelled at him for telling him about the altitude change was just grumpy. He said that's personal preference or whatever. So they said, don't worry about that. You are not required. So to that, I would go to your point. Here's the way I would operate. Are you required? No, you're not required. But if I'm on with a flight following, I'm definitely going to advise them, because I want them to know what's going on so they can plan ahead, because sometimes they're giving you traffic separation and they're trying to keep you away from IFR traffic and things like that. So you're helping them out by following their direction. So do you have to? No, but I would definitely advise. And if you know it's busy in that airspace, I would talk to them first, because you don't want to cause a traffic conflict, because you decided you wanted to descend now. So just talk to them is what I would do.
We've got two that were very similar here in a row on IFR flight plans vectored into Class Bravo, but have not explicitly been cleared into Class Bravo. Any concerns there?
As long as you were on your IFR clearance, you do not need a clearance in the Bravo. You are cleared into whatever they put you in. They could put you into a TFR, restricted area, prohibited area. If you're on an IFR flight plan, you are on that clearance, you're good to go. You don't need to worry about it. That's the nice thing about flying IFR. It's restrictive in the sense that you're routing, but you never have to worry about airspace. You're cleared into everything. I think that the question that came up before was, it's like, if you're inside that airspace and you cancel your IFR, are you now in trouble because now your VFR inside that airspace without a clearance? And that's where you might want to clarify. So that's the one. I don't know the definitive answer. We wouldn't want to talk to our legal folks about that to find out what that situation would be.
If you're cleared to enter Class Bravo, are you automatically cleared through the airspace over Class Delta if they're overflying?
Well, remember that you don't need to be cleared over airspace over Delta. Are they asking? I'm wondering if they're asking cleared through Delta, like a transition, right? So maybe you're in Bravo. Typically, the Delta is underneath the Bravo. It's not going to be sticking up into the Bravo. So say you're cleared into Bravo. I guess they must be talking some situation where maybe as you go to enter the Bravo, you're going to clip off Delta. Ask them. That's what I would do, because I'm not exactly sure what the situation would be there, but that's like really specific. And that's what I'm guessing is, because if you're in Bravo, you're not going to be going through Delta. Bravo supersedes Delta. But check your chart. So if in doubt, ask, and just say like, am I okay to go through this? My suspicion is you probably are, but I don't have a definitive answer for that right now.
All right, so back to ADSB and Mode C transponder. I thought ADSB 1090 ES, the extended Mode S, extended squitter transponder, replaces Mode C transponder. Mode C transponder only used in conjunction with ADSB 978 megahertz UAT.
Okay, unfortunately, you're getting into the technical stuff that I said that I do not know, which is why I provided that article on purpose, because literally I saw it. I'm like, they're going to ask me questions and I don't know all that technical stuff. So that said, go check out that article I provided. It's literally called Everything You Need to Know About ADSB. So check it out. All I know is that I want to make sure that my aircraft is equipped appropriately to go into these areas. So it's like, and that may be the case, and I'd have to go look that one up. I don't know that off the top of my head.
When departing Class Bravo in Detroit, you have multiple Class Delta. Does your heading altitude allow you to enter Class Delta without radio request if you do not have flight following?
So that was the same question that we just asked. So what I would do in that case, and I'm looking up, that's not, I don't know what Detroit's, what is Detroit's, DTW? DTW, is that right? Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, let me pull up the sectional here. I'm going to bring this over. There's Detroit. This is not like the right one, I don't think, but I'm going to assume that I'm close to Detroit. There we go. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, so Delta, yeah, look at all these Deltas right outside the Bravo. So I'm assuming you're leaving here, you're on the clearance with them, and they're going to boom, butt you right in. I would ask. So that's the situation. Like if you're going to be going into that Delta and you're on a Bravo clearance, but remember that here the Delta is below 3,000 feet. And the Bravo, which is going to be right above it, where's the shelf here? I'm looking for the markings on the shelf. Here's 3,000 feet. So if you're in Bravo, if you're above 3,000 feet, you're not in the Delta, so it shouldn't be an issue. If for some reason they're having you at like say 2,500 and putting you right in, then I'm looking for that transition. So I'd be querying them like, hey, do you want me to talk to tower? Because now I'm in Delta's airspace. So typically they're going to coordinate, but if you're not sure, please ask, verify that.
When you're overflying Class Charlie, how would you call that airspace, just for courtesy?
So overflying Charlie, I would just ask for flight following and just tell them where I'm going. So like in the case of Charlie, let me go back and find a Charlie that I had on here. So say I'm going to fly over Buffalo and I'm going to be at 5,500 feet. I would just call it Buffalo approach, Cessna 65659er, en route to, and give them the airport that's giving you this route, right? En route to whatever, we're flying south to north, 5,500 feet. That's all I'm going to tell them, because that they're going to know, and they're going to get me on a squawk code, and they're going to see where I'm going, and then they'll help me with traffic advisories. So there's nothing really special to request over that. Remember, it's not like a Delta where you're going to be flying through the Delta, overflying the field. You're just letting them know they're going to see you on radar. They'll know what you're doing. So I don't think there's anything special to request there.
Okay. I'll go back to this list. Best procedure for launching from an airport within 10 nautical miles of the Class Charlie airspace and landing at the primary airport in Class Charlie. Contact approach first or directly contact tower.
Sorry, so that one, because I was looking at this other question here that got my attention.
So you're departing from an airport within 10 miles of Class Charlie. So you're not in Class Charlie, but you're within 10 miles. Would you contact approach or go direct to tower? if you were going to land at Charlie Airport.
So you're going into the Charlie. Yeah, I still contact approach. Always contact approach first. So let's say you're under the shelf. You've just taken off. So I would say something like, say I'm here at Buffalo. Let's say I'm at this Flying F airport, right? So I'd say Buffalo approach Cessna 65659er just departed Flying F airport. Request landing at Buffalo, right? And so then they're going to give me a squawk code, and I'd probably be out there circling or whatever because I want to establish communication, and then they're going to tell me what to fly and everything else. So that's what I would do. I would take off, fly, I tell them where I am, and I'm requesting landing at Buffalo. I'm not going to just take off and fly straight at the Charlie. I want to make sure I don't bust it, and it's not that far. We're talking less than 5 miles there. So I would just kind of circle, call them, and get directions for what they want me to do. But you're going to contact approach first, not tower. All right, I did see down here, let me just hit this one. This person said that you are not absolved of transgression if ATC vectors you through a prohibited airspace. And that's with any airspace. If you're on a VFR clearance and you're getting vectored, they're giving you headings, you are still responsible to avoid airspace. Unless they tell you you're cleared through things, right? You are not supposed to go through that stuff. But when it comes to, and I'm not sure if, Greg, if you're still on, are you trying to say that's also for IFR? Because for IFR, generally it's like, you're cleared through whatever they want to clear you through. So I mean, because if Greg's still on, I'd love to see what if you were asking about the IFR. Because if so, if I'm not correct, I will go dig into that one. So all right, other questions.
How about you're underneath the shelf with Class Bravo? Is it good practice to get flight following if you're just like doing a sightseeing flight? If you're just kind of tooling around, they're concerned about, are they going to be vectored or are they going to have freedom to fly? So it's just one of those kind of iffy flight following questions there. So I don't think it's necessarily related to Bravo as much in this situation, but you know.
Yeah, are you going to get vectored? Remember, you're outside the airspace, so tell them what you're doing. Like my experience with that has been, they're going to give you a squawk code. Now at least they know that somebody's down there. They can advise you. So yeah, so Greg's saying just vector. Yeah, so it's just a VFR vector, not IFR. IFR, you're cleared through whatever. So when it comes to that, yeah, you're still VFR. So get your squawk code. You can do what you want, and then I would still talk to them and just tell them what I'm doing. Heck, I've done that here with Frederick, like at the Delta airport here, there was an old school where I used to teach out here. And so I was taking somebody up so they could take photos of some of the students, like I was flying over the school. And I told them, like, I said, Frederick Tower, I'd like to, if I could, I want to circle around the school down here. And I told them where it was. And they were like, yeah, great. You know, and they just told me what altitude to maintain and just don't go above this and advise when you're finished. So that's within the airspace. When you're outside the airspace, you can do what you want. You can still get flight following and just give them a heads up on what you're doing. And what they'll do, the nice thing that they'll do, and you'll hear this with helicopters all the time, is that you'll hear other people say, hey, there's an airplane circling down there. Keep an eye out for them. So they're advising the other traffic about what you're doing. So I think it's better to contact and talk to them.
Do you need ADSB out to get flight following when you are outside of Bravo or Charlie airspace?
No, ADSB is, basically you need ADSB wherever ADSB is required. Let me go back to that diagram. Here it is. So say you're below 10,000 feet and you're outside of the Mode C veil, you're not above or inside Bravo or Charlie, you don't have to have ADSB. So you're going to need to have a transponder so they can see you, right? Because otherwise they're just getting a primary signal off of you. But no, in that case, you would just need a transponder. You don't need ADSB. You only need ADSB where it says ADSB is required to get that flight following part. I'm trying to think if you didn't have a transponder at all, because you're not required to have it there. Could they still give you flight following? I don't know. They might make you report. That's a good one.
In radio calls, just the best practice here is that if you're asked to ident, there's no need to clutter the frequency saying identing and repeat that part. The ident itself is acknowledgement.
Okay, somebody said that as a comment.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm wondering. Yeah, I've always come back and said ident because I'm going to verify that I have the correct code. So I'm still going to come back and say, oh, actually squawk. So I'm going to at least say squawk, and I usually will say the ident part. So I don't know that I've read that, but I do it because I want to verify that I've got the right code. Because they'll come back and say, no, squawk this, like you screwed up the number.
Gotcha.
So
I think that's a pretty good sample there, Chris.
Okay. Well, that said, I know we got tons, guys. You guys are amazing. I know that we've had like at least half the audience is sticking around, so I'm hoping we answered your questions. Again, don't forget next month we're going to talk about tailwheel, which has been we've had this topic requested multiple times. But you know, the big thing we would love to see is please tell us, what are you interested in? So give us some ideas of stuff that you would like to hear. And by the way, Jacqueline, real quick, she says, where's a transponder required? I've got that reg listed on the handout, so go check it out. It literally says transponder, and it gives you the 2 regs, so you can check it out. It's basically the same places that ADSB are. ADSB has 1 extra requirement. So please tell us if you've got topics you'd like to hear about. Email us at ftinitiative@aopa.org, or just hit us up right here in the questions. That FT initiative is Foxtrot Tango Initiative@aopa.org. We'd love to hear from you, and we want to provide stuff that you want to know about. So that's what we want to do. So anyway, that said, I guess we're going to bring this one to a close. Again, we'll see you hopefully next month, June 15th, 12 to 1 Eastern. That's at 1600 Z for our folks that are not in the Eastern time zone. That's it. So we'll see you next time for Conventional Wisdom. And I guess we will log off. And guys, play safe.